My name is Isabella Thompson, and I was 34 years old when my sister looked me in the eye and told me to find somewhere else to die. Just 3 days after our parents' funeral, while I was still using a cane from the riding accident that nearly killed me 2 years ago, Taylor stood in the doorway of the only home I had left and said those words without a single tear. She had brought moving boxes, her husband, Brandon, and a level of cruelty I never knew lived inside her. They were already claiming the estate, while the grave soil was still fresh. She thought I was a useless burden. She thought I was finished. She thought wrong. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just looked at Taylor and saw a balance sheet that had finally hit zero. My sister was still talking. Something about how she was going to turn my studio into a walk-in closet for her shoe collection, but her voice was just background noise now. I realized then that my love for her had been a high-price subscription, and I was officially hitting the cancel button. I turned away from her and Brandon, the rhythmic thud of my cane against the marble floor sounding like a countdown. I walked straight toward the west wing, to the heavy oak doors of my jewelry studio. Taylor followed me, her heels clicking with an arrogant, predatory rhythm. "Are you even listening, Isabella?" she snapped. "Brandon has already called the appraisers. This house needs to be cleared by Friday." I didn't answer. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my master key, the one our father had given me when I saved the company 5 years ago. I stepped inside the room Taylor called the junk room. To her, it was just a space filled with stones and sketches. To me, it was the engine room of the Thompson Empire. I went straight to the wall safe, hidden behind the framed blueprint of the company's first showroom. I didn't care that they were watching. I punched in the code, the heavy steel door swinging open to reveal hundreds of original sketches for the autumn collection. These weren't just drawings. They were millions of dollars in intellectual property, the very designs the company needed to survive the next quarter. I gathered the portfolios and placed them in the high-security fire vault inside the safe. Then, I did the one thing Taylor never expected. I changed the digital encryption key. Next, I moved to my workstation. My fingers, usually so careful with delicate gems, moved with clinical precision across the keyboard. I accessed the company's main design server. I revoked every administrative privilege Taylor thought she had. I locked the soul of the company behind a wall of code she would never break. When I finally turned around, Taylor was smirking. "Locking the door won't save you, Isabella," she sneered. "The house is mine." "The house might be," I said, my voice as cold as the platinum I worked with every day. "But the designs, the patents, and the access to the manufacturing contracts, those are mine. And as of 60 seconds ago, you and Brandon are officially locked out." The smirk on her face didn't just fade, it vanished. I watched her eyes dart to the glowing red status light on the server, then back to me. She wasn't shocked by what she'd done to me. She was shocked that I had stopped playing my role. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was a hostile takeover, and I was the one holding all the shares. I looked at the necklace Taylor was wearing as she stood there, fuming. It was a custom piece from our signature collection, 18-karat gold with a centerpiece of rare blue tourmaline. She didn't realize that every link in that chain was polished by my hands, while my spine felt like it was being held together by rusted nails. I had been the silent investor in their version of a family for far too long, and I was finally looking at the ledger. 5 years ago, our father sat in his study, head in his hands, because Taylor had nearly bankrupted the company. She had authorized a marketing campaign that cost $750,000, featuring influencers who didn't know the difference between a synthetic stone and a diamond. I was the one who spent 6 months traveling to mines in Brazil, securing the contracts that brought us back into the black. I didn't ask for a bonus. I asked for the company to stay a family legacy. Then came the accident. 2 years ago, on a crisp morning in the Hamptons, my horse, a gentle creature I'd raised since he was a foal, suddenly went feral under me. I don't remember the ground hitting me. I only remember the sound of my own vertebrae snapping like dry winter twigs. 11 hours of surgery, metal rods where bone used to be. For 18 months, I lived in a wheelchair, navigating these marble floors like a ghost in my own home. During those months, I stayed silent while Taylor treated me like a broken piece of equipment. I kept wondering what I had ever done wrong to deserve her contempt. I felt like a survivor who had lost her right to speak because she could no longer stand on her own 2 feet. It is an invisible chain, the guilt of being the one who lived, but came back less than. I believed the lie that I was a burden, so I paid for my stay with my silence and my labor. I sat in my studio, trapped in that chair, designing the very collections that paid for the Manhattan lifestyle Taylor uses to mock me. She thinks the gold she wears is hers by birthright, but I know it was forged in the heat of my chronic pain. My compassion had been a high-limit credit card they'd been using without a second thought, but they finally hit the ceiling. I watched her face now, the anger bubbling under her expensive foundation. She still didn't understand. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a final audit. My loyalty had been a professional resource they'd exploited for years. But as of today, I was officially declaring bankruptcy on this relationship. Every design, every patent, every cent of value in the Thompson name was built on the work I did while they were busy playing socialites. The blood in the gold belongs to me, and I'm finally here to collect. Taylor didn't take being locked out well. She shifted from a sister to a saboteur within minutes. By that evening, my phone was a graveyard of notifications. She'd taken the battle to the public square of social media, posting a photo of my cane leaning against the empty wheelchair I hadn't used in months. Her caption was a masterpiece of manufactured concern. My heart breaks as my sister's mental state declines. We're doing everything we can to keep her safe while she hallucinates about owning things that aren't hers. She was trying to bankrupt my credibility before the will was even read. She tried to break into my studio twice that night. I heard the frantic scraping of metal against the lock and the muffled curses of Brandon as they realized a master craftsman builds things meant to stay shut. When they failed, Taylor resorted to emotional terrorism. I walked into the library and found her standing over the fireplace, holding our mother's vintage jewelry catalogue, the one with her handwritten notes in the margins. Taylor looked at me, her eyes manic, and dropped it into the flames. "If I can't have the designs, Isabella, you won't have the memories," she hissed. I watched the paper curl into black ash, but I didn't reach for the fire poker. I just watched her. She started throwing in more of our parents' mementos, one by one, watching for a crack in my composure. I realized then that Taylor's aggression was just an empty wallet power illusion. This is what happens when a person's entire identity is rented by a bank account that just went into overdraft. She had no internal value, no core principles, so she compensated with a louder, crueler volume. She was acting like a queen because she was terrified of being a pauper. She owed $400,000 to creditors who didn't care about her social standing, and she was drowning under the pressure of her own greed. The cruelty wasn't a sign of strength. It was a symptom of her collapse. She was a hollow statue trying to keep the gold plating from peeling off. I didn't feel anger as the last of my mother's notes burned. I felt the clinical detachment of a liquidator. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a family feud anymore. It was a balance sheet, and Taylor was a liability I was about to write off for good. My compassion had been a luxury they'd overdrafted for years, and I was finally closing the account. I took a car into Manhattan the following morning. The city didn't feel like a playground anymore. It felt like a courtroom. I went straight to a glass and steel building where John was waiting for me in a private office. John was more than just our family attorney. He was the man who had helped my father navigate every boardroom battle for 30 years. He sat behind a mahogany desk, his expression as sharp and clinical as a diamond saw. "Taylor thinks she's playing a game of checkers, Isabella," John said, sliding a thick leather folder across the desk. "But your father spent the last 6 months of his life playing grandmaster-level chess." I opened the folder. It wasn't just a will. It was an indictment. My father had initiated a secret internal audit right after that Christmas dinner, the one where Taylor had made me sit out of the family photo because my cane didn't fit her aesthetic. He hadn't been blind. He had been watching. John explained that my father had documented every unauthorized transfer Taylor had made to cover her $400,000 debt. He'd watched her try to erase my presence from the family legacy, and he'd made a decisive choice. Your father told me he finally understood which daughter saw him as a person and which one saw him as a bank account, John said quietly. The will had been updated 6 months ago, witnessed by his closest associates and notarized in this very room. We spent 3 hours going over the strategy. This wasn't just about a house or a trust fund anymore. It was about a systematic removal. John had evidence of Brandon using company credit cards to fund a gambling habit that had drained hundreds of thousands of dollars from the manufacturing accounts. We were preparing a formal notice to the board of directors to strip Taylor of her title and her standing. I didn't feel the usual ache in my spine as I looked at the documents. I felt a cold, methodical power. I wasn't a victim seeking an apology. I was a shareholder conducting an audit. My father had left me the keys to the kingdom, and John was teaching me how to lock the gates. We mapped out the legal maneuvers with lethal precision. As I stood to leave, the office was silent, but my mind was loud with the sound of a new reality. I wasn't the useless sister anymore. I was the architect of Taylor's professional execution. Inside that office, my sunrise had finally arrived. The kind made of facts, numbers, and the quiet weight of coming justice. John didn't say a word. He just opened a small, velvet-lined drawer in the side of his desk and pulled out a single, black, universal serial bus drive. He held it between his fingers like a rare, uncut diamond. "This wasn't meant for a courtroom, Isabella," he said, his voice dropping to a low, heavy whisper. "This was meant for your father's peace of mind. He spent months debating whether to delete it or show you." I took the drive, the plastic feeling heavy, with the weight of a secret I wasn't sure I was ready to reconcile. He connected the drive to his laptop and turned the screen toward me. The footage was grainy, time-stamped 2 years ago, the night before my accident. It was a view of the stables, the moonlight reflecting off the polished paddock gates. I saw a figure moving in the shadows, dressed in a familiar cashmere coat. It was Taylor. She wasn't there to pet the horse. She moved with clinical speed, pulling a small, black electronic device from her pocket. She tucked it deep under the lining of my favorite saddle, right where the cinch would press it into my horse's spine. John paused the frame. "It's an ultrasonic emitter," he explained, pointing to the small protrusion on the screen. "It's designed to trigger an immediate, violent fight-or-flight response in livestock. It is high-frequency pain that nobody can hear but the animal." My breath didn't hitch. My heart didn't race. I just felt a profound, freezing clarity. This wasn't a tragedy of errors or a freak accident. This was a maiming, an attempted erasure. Taylor hadn't just waited for me to become a burden. She had manufactured the weight herself so she could take the crown. I looked at John, my voice coming out as flat as a deadline. "Why didn't he call the police?" John sighed, the sound of a man carrying someone else's burden for far too long. "Because he was a father. He spent weeks watching that video, hoping he was wrong. He kept Taylor close for 6 months, waiting for a single sign of remorse, a single moment of sisterly love that would prove the footage was a lie. But Christmas was his final audit. When he watched her push me out of that family photo because my cane didn't fit her aesthetic, he realized Taylor wasn't just a daughter with a spending problem, she was a predator. The watchman's silence was his last attempt at mercy. But this new will was his final verdict. I took the drive back, the metal cold against my palm. "Is this enough to end her?" I asked. John looked me in the eye. "Isabella, this is a kill shot. It removes any claim of sound mind or fair distribution. It turns a family dispute into a criminal investigation for attempted manslaughter." I didn't feel sad. I felt like a jeweler who had finally found the fatal flaw in a gemstone that looked perfect from the outside. The ledger was no longer just about dollars. It was about blood. Taylor had told me to find somewhere else to die, but she was the one who had tried to build my coffin 2 years ago. The accounting was over. Now, it was time for the execution. The official reading of the will took place in the grand drawing room of the Hamptons mansion, a room that had seen generations of Thompson celebrations, but was now prepared for an execution. Taylor arrived early, dressed in a black designer suit that looked more like a coronation outfit than morning attire. She sat at the head of the long table, her chin tilted up, already mentally spending the $28 million she was certain was hers. Brandon sat beside her, his leg bouncing nervously, his eyes darting around the room as if calculating the resale value of the antiques. John entered with 2 assistants and several police officers who remained discreetly near the door. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't offer a smile. He simply placed his leather briefcase on the table and looked at Taylor with a gaze that was clinical and final. "Before we begin," John said, his voice echoing in the silent room, "I must inform you that the document your mother kept in her nightstand was a preliminary draft. It was never the legal instrument of this estate." Taylor's smirk didn't just falter, it froze. "What are you talking about?" That will was clear. Eldest daughter inherits everything. John ignored the outburst and began reading from a thick document bound in blue legal backing. "I, Robert Thompson, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all previous testaments. To our daughter, Taylor Louise Thompson, we leave an annual allowance of $50,000 to be held in a strictly managed trust. Any attempt to contest this will, or any evidence of criminal conduct, will result in immediate forfeiture of all interest." Taylor shrieked, standing so abruptly her chair scraped the floor like a scream. $50,000? That's an insult! I'm the eldest. I'm the legacy. "There is more," John continued, his voice hardening. "Due to overwhelming evidence of financial fraud and the deliberate endangerment of a family member, Taylor Thompson and Brandon Hartley are hereby disinherited with prejudice." He slid 2 documents across the table, a copy of the stable's security footage and Brandon's illegal gambling records. The door at the far end of the drawing room opened. I walked in, moving slowly but steadily. I wasn't using the cane. My spine was straight, my head held high, the physical manifestation of a recovery Taylor had tried to prevent. I stood at the foot of the table and looked at my sister, who was now quivering as the police officers stepped forward. Brandon was handcuffed immediately for unauthorized manufacturing account withdrawals and illegal gambling. Taylor sank to her knees, the empty Queen of Manhattan finally realizing her throne was made of ash. She looked at me, her eyes raw and desperate, the same way I had looked at her 3 days ago. "Isabella, please," she whispered. "We're blood. You can't do this." I didn't feel a surge of anger. I didn't feel a need to yell. I just looked at her and delivered the final audit. 3 days ago, you stood in this doorway and told me to find somewhere else to die because I was useless. Now, the house is worth $15 million, and the company assets are valued at $60 million. I leaned down until I was inches from her face, my voice as cold as the stones I cut for a living. "I found somewhere, Taylor. It's called home. And since you're officially bankrupt and empty, you should probably find somewhere else to be. You're useless now." After the police led Taylor and Brandon out of the drawing room in handcuffs, the silence that settled over the Thompson estate changed. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating silence of hidden secrets and manufactured cruelty. It was the clean, quiet air of a house that had finally been cleared of its rot. I stood at the window, watching the flashing blue lights fade into the Hamptons fog, and I didn't feel a single drop of regret. This wasn't a family tragedy. It was a successful audit. I didn't keep the wealth for the sake of luxury. I used the millions of dollars recovered from Taylor's fraud to establish the Thompson Foundation for Disabled Artisans. I transformed my private studio into a world-class training facility, a sanctuary where people who have been told they are broken or useless can learn the delicate art of jewelry fabrication. We teach them that a scar isn't a defect. It's a facet that reflects light in ways a perfect surface never could. I turned my parents' mansion from a fortress of exclusion into a lighthouse of opportunity. A month later, I finally felt strong enough to open my mother's leather-bound diary. I skipped past the mundane notes about the garden and the weather until I reached the final entry. Her looping cursive seemed to glow on the page. She had written, "Isabella, you are the mirror of my soul. You are patient, quiet, and strong in ways nobody notices until it is too late. You are the hardest diamond I have ever known. You were never a burden. You were everything. I sat in her favorite reading chair and let the tears come not out of grief, but out of total release. The final piece of my past was settled on a quiet evening at the beach. I walked down to the water's edge without the cane. I built a small fire in the sand and watched the flames dance against the dark Atlantic waves. I looked at the old wood of that cane, a symbol of the 2 years I spent believing I was worth nothing, and I threw it into the heart of the fire. I watched it turn to ash, burning away the girl who was a victim. I am Isabella Thompson. I am an artist, a survivor, and the sole architect of my own light. To those of you listening, especially those who have always felt like you were at the edge of your own family, this is my letter to you. They might have tried to write you out of the story. They might have tried to dim your shine because it made them uncomfortable. But remember this, you do not need their permission to be luminous. Your value is not a transaction to be negotiated by people who cannot see your worth. Build your own legacy. Shine so bright that they have no choice but to realize what they lost. If Isabella's journey reminded you that your worth is non-negotiable, type finally in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice. Thank you for watching.